Alright boys, I've got a bone to pick. So I've been going on TikTok a lot lately, and I've seen a lot of people kind of trying to flex their mechanical prowess on there by showing the correct way to solder wires and all that kind of stuff. Now if you guys know me, you guys know that there's a long list of things that I am way too opinionated about, and this is one of them. So today I'm going to be talking about the differences, the benefits, and drawbacks of crimping over soldering. Because it is my firm belief that if you're working on a car, you shouldn't be soldering any wires at all whatsoever. With that being said, if you guys are new here, my name is Irvin. This is my JDM space. Do a lot of cool ass shit here. If you guys like it, make sure to subscribe. We've got a lot of projects coming, and hopefully you guys will be learning something by the end of this video. So let's get into it. So let's start off by understanding what we're actually going to be doing today. If you're in a situation where you need to join 2 or more wires together, there are a few ways of doing that. Soldering is one that in the past has been pretty much the go-to for most mechanics and do-it-yourselfers. Now while it is a good way of getting 2 wires connected together and making sure that they have a proper connection and don't break apart, there are a few drawbacks to them. Now my main gripe with it is that there's so many factors that go into soldering that if you get any of them wrong, then there's a possibility that your solder is not going to be a good connection. Now a few of those factors include the soldering iron that you're using, whether or not you can get it hot enough, whether or not it's been maintained well enough to be able to put down a good solder, the type of solder that you're using, the thickness of solder that you're using, where you apply the solder, how you apply the solder. There's so many things that could go wrong with it, and so many things that I see people doing wrong with it on a daily basis. That's the reason that I don't personally recommend soldering at all. So I'm going to go ahead and put you guys on a tripod and show you how a properly soldered joint is going to look, and show you the difference between a properly soldered one and one that was incorrectly soldered and what it can do. So here we're at the bench. I got pretty much everything laid out that you're going to need to start soldering. Now there are a few different choices of soldering irons that you could go with. I personally have a bench unit that is super nice and honestly the best soldering setup that you could get. If you get one of the plug-in ones that just plugs into the wall straight to the iron, those ones are a little sketchy because they don't have temperature control, so you don't know if you're getting hot enough or too hot. So I don't like using those. And also the butane ones honestly don't usually get hot enough to be able to solder wires together efficiently. So I try to stay away from those as well. Now I personally don't own either of the last two because I personally don't use the soldering iron for anything that has wheels on it. So this can stay here and I can work on like my guitars or any sort of small electronics with that here. You will not catch me within 5 feet of a car holding one of those, alright? Never. Now one of the things that I mentioned in the factors of things that can lead to a bad solder is the maintenance of the soldering iron. And what does that exactly mean? I'm talking about the tip. So you can see the tip of my iron is nice and clean and a completely different color than the rest of the iron. That's because the tip is tinned. So that means that there's a layer of solder that's just stuck to the tip and will never come off. So this provides a nice surface to be able to transfer heat onto the wires. This is really important and it's achieved by good maintenance and proper tooling. Now to get that tip, you can see I got a wet sponge and some brass wool right there. That helps me clean the tip off after every use and make sure that I can get a good layer of solder on there to protect the tip. Now before every time I use it, I tin it just like that to make sure that the tip stays nice. Now I got my unit set to about 750 degrees, which is about twice the melting point of our solder. Now this solder you can see is called a rosin flux core solder. This is actually made for electrical work. If you use a different type of solder like acid core or silver solder, they're not going to work right. The acid core stuff will actually eat away at the joint and you don't want that. So you want to make sure you get the rosin core solder for electrical work. Now let's get a piece of wire so that we can solder it together. So we've got 2 pieces of wire. Now we need to strip these somehow. I personally love these types of strippers. They're automatic strippers, so you can just strip the wire all in one job and it's super easy. Just like that. And then tip comes off. We can just put that one back, get the other one, take a little bite off of it, boom, stripped, perfect. When you're soldering, you want to make sure you have a good mechanical connection. So I'm going to go ahead and cross the wires and then fold them over each other, just to make sure that we have a good connection before we solder. That, even though it's a pretty strong connection and I can pull on it pretty reasonably hard and nothing happens, you do not want to leave it like that. And I know what you guys are thinking, nobody actually just twists and tape shit, but I'll be the first one to tell you that they do, and I've seen it way more times than I would like to count. It honestly hurts me every single time. Like, a lot of these people are getting paid and are just doing this kind of work. That shit is whack, all right? Take pride in your work, do it right. I'm gonna go ahead and put it in my helping hands, which are really nice to have when you're soldering stuff, but I know that when you're working on a car, it's not necessarily feasible to have something like this. But there's our joint. Now, of course, before I touch the joint with my soldering iron, I tinned it. And I'm gonna go ahead and add a little bit of solder to it, just to make it easier to transfer the heat onto the wire. I'm gonna lay the soldering iron on the bottom of the wire and just lightly tap the top of it with my solder until it starts to feed in. You want to heat the wire, not the solder. And just like that, you see our solder joint has wicked up all of the solder, and it is completely silver, the entire thing. You can't see any more copper. That's what you want. Now, this is the kind of stuff that I saw on TikTok. This is a cold solder joint, pretty much made by just having a soldering iron that's a little too cold and isn't able to actually heat the wire enough to be able to wick the solder into the wire the way that it's supposed to. This will most definitely fail. Don't ever do this. Now, if I were to be actually putting this in a car, I would be taking a little piece of heat shrink. This is dual-walled adhesive-lined heat shrink also, so it's not your normal parts store stuff. Now that this is cooled, you can see why it's called adhesive-lined. Right about here, you can see a little baby bit of schmoo coming out of the bottom of the joint. The adhesive-lined heat shrink tubing like this is going to make sure that your joint stays watertight and doesn't get any sort of contamination in it, and it's going to give your joint the best chance of survival. Now here is another good solder joint, right? Now you can see when I try to bend it, it doesn't bend. It actually bends quite a bit farther away from the joint. That's because extra solder has wicked its way into the wire and made this entire section completely rigid. Now, when you're putting this in a car where things have the tendency to move and flex, this causes a really brittle joint that with only a little bit of flexing could actually break. Just like that. You caused a weak point in the wire. That's why I don't think soldering is a good option in cars, because that over time has the tendency to break more than a good crimp would. Now, I know a lot of people are scared of crimping and completely against it because they've tried it in the past and it hasn't worked. There's a few reasons for that. Now, there's a few different styles of crimp terminals. So if you're joining two wires together, you got butt splices, which are pretty normal. You can get those at the auto parts store, and almost everybody's had an experience with them, and most of them have been bad. Now, let me show you something. These guys are the normal ones that you usually see at the parts store. You can see it's just a hard plastic shell that goes around a small metal crimp. This is what most people are used to, and this is probably the reason that they hate them. So usually you can go to Walmart, you can go to AutoZone, and you can get a kit of these and crimpers for like 10 bucks and get on your journey to start hating crimping. The first thing that I will say is that the crimpers that come with those kits are normally garbage. They're pretty much just stamped sheet metal that's stamped in a way that will crimp these connectors, and they work about as well as I do after a long night of drinking. So my first piece of advice for getting into crimping is get yourself a good set of crimpers. So these are mine. This is a set of snap-on crimpers and strippers, so this is nice because it comes with both a stripper and a crimper. And at the tip, you can see it's got a spot for insulated terminals and non-insulated terminals, so this is going to come in handy. You can see the girth on these, right? These are nice and fat metal that's not ever going to flex like the ones that you get from the parts store. Get yourself a good set of crimpers. So to start a crimp, we're going to start off by stripping the end just like we did with the solder. First thing I do is usually put the crimp terminal in my crimpers and get it ready to crimp onto the first wire. Now you guys can see I'm on the insulated side of it. We can stick the wire all the way into the crimp and squeeze tight. That's what it should look like when you're done. And you should be able to pull on that and it won't separate. And we'll do the same thing for the other one. Go nice and tight. There we go. I'm pulling on this wire and it's literally stripping back the rest of the wire before the crimp is even trying to separate. So that's a good crimp. However, this is probably the worst crimp terminal that you could get. Now these are probably your best bet as far as all-in-one crimps. These are weatherproof crimps. You can buy these at most parts store, same as the non-weatherproof ones, but these ones are way better. They go together the same way that the non-weatherproof ones go together. You just stick them on, crimp them down, get your other end in, and crimp it down. That's a secure connection. However, you guys can see that the insulation on it is actually clear and doesn't look the same as the hard plastic one did. That's because this isn't any regular insulation. This is actually heat shrink tubing built right in. Now you guys can see how much more professional the weatherproof crimp looks than our regular plastic crimp. Now, they are using adhesive lined heat shrink tubing on this also, so they're completely weatherproof. There's not going to be any water coming through them. Now I'm pretty much done talking about the type of crimp terminals that you can get at an auto parts store. There are a few more that I guess I can show you guys, but I do not recommend ever using them. These are the two we got. Now we got wire nuts that are screw on, and you pretty much just screw them onto wires and they make a connection. These are trash. If I see you using these, I will personally come to your house just to yell at you, all right? These are shit. If you put these on a car, then fuck you. These are crimp-on wire nuts, which are like slightly better, but I don't personally like them because they leave all the wire exposed to atmosphere, and I just don't think they look good. So avoid these, but fuck these. All right, now we're gonna get into pretty much my favorite style of crimping, which is open barrel crimping. This requires slightly different tooling than the closed barrel crimping that we just did. This is gonna involve some open barrel crimpers. Now we got multiple different types, and this type of stuff has actually gotten a lot cheaper over the years because now you can pick up a set of these crimpers on Amazon for like less than $30, and they're actually really nice. This is a ratcheting style one that performs the two processes that we're going to be doing at the same time, which is super nice, and I'll show you what I mean by that in a little bit. And these are just a single process one. You can honestly just get these and they're super cheap and you can do everything that you would need, but these make the job a lot faster. Now to be able to use those crimpers, we have to have a special terminal, which you can also find on Amazon Prime, 2-day shipping. They're nice, all right? Links to all of this stuff is gonna be in the description. I showed you guys these in the video where I was installing my radio. They're super nice. Now the process of crimping an open barrel terminal as opposed to a closed barrel is slightly different. You are going to need less of the insulation stripped off of the wire to make sure that you can fit it into the joint. As you guys can see, this terminal has 4 sets of ears on it, alright? 2 thick ones and 2 thin ones. Now this is going to be important. The way that the wire is going to sit in this, it's going to have the conductor strands in the middle sets of ears, and then the outer sets of ears are going to wrap around the insulation. That's 2 separate processes that you have to do to make this crimp work. For the first process, I'm going to go ahead and stick my crimp connection to the crimper. and put my wire in it. Squeeze down. And there we have a good crimp joint. So right there you can see that we're crimped around our conductor strands only, and then our insulation is out by the second set of ears. So we can do that by using a different die, doing the same process. And that's what your finished product should look like. A nice tight crimp. You can do a little pull test. That's not going anywhere. Now since that does take 2 different strokes to get each one of those made, it does get a little bit cumbersome, but that is where these guys come in. You can see they're nice and fat, and they've actually got 2 separate spaces that crimp, and this will allow you to do both of those processes at the same time. I'll go ahead and stick that into where it needs to be. As you guys can see, it's got the wire gauges written on the die to make sure that you're in the right spot. So I'm going to go ahead and stick my wire in, same as before, and you can hear it clicking. That means that I won't lose my spot if I release tension on it. But now that the wire's in the right spot, I can go ahead and finish the crimp. And see, that did both the insulation and the conductor at the same time, which is super nice. This is now super strong, never coming apart. I could probably lift a good amount of weight with this. Now of course, heat shrink tubing on top of that would finish this off and make it look completely, I won't say factory, but it'll look like a proper repair. So let's get some heavy shit to see if we can hang from this. First up, I've got the old front rotor from my IS300. This thing's pretty heavy. You guys can see, there's our crimp joint. That's the only thing holding this rotor up. And it's fine, right? That is perfect. That is how strong crimps are. You're not gonna break this shit. This shit is not gonna come apart. That is literally the connection that OEM manufacturers use on every single thing in their car, because every single connector is terminated with a crimp on terminal. So I hope that I've shown you guys the light and shown you why crimping is so much better than soldering, because honestly, after learning how to crimp and the ins and outs of it, I will never go back. I will never go back. With that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video and got something out of it. And if you did, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe, because we got a lot more stuff coming, a lot more informational stuff, a lot more builds. It's gonna be a good time. So remember, boys, no more soldering. Get some crimpers, do it right. I'll see you guys next time.